No orc clan has fallen from greater heights than the Snakebite. Snakebites are still around in modern Warhammer 40,000, but they've been getting a smaller and smaller slice of the orc pie since the very beginning. Snakebites are the primitive orcs. They don't go in for all of this fancy technology, no zap guns, no tractor cannons. They like squigs, they like Gretchen, and they like those two things. Back in the old days, the Snakebites were the other half of the orcs. You had your regular orcs, and then you had the weird primitive Snakebites. They had their own miniatures, they had their own models, they had a lot of parts borrowed from orcs and goblins from classic Warhammer fantasy battles. They were a big deal. I would say there's a little bit of a disconnect between how cool the Snakebites were in their artwork depictions versus some of the models that were actually available for them, but they were still there, they were a big deal, and Gretchen and Squigs were a bigger deal, where now so many new kits have come out and the orcs have kind of gotten so much more technologically advanced, there's not really a place for the Snakebites, and we kind of saw them just diminish and diminish and diminish. In 4th and 5th edition Warhammer 40k, they were almost gone. There's a couple of depictions of the Snakebites where they're just orcs, but you paint them mostly brown, and that's kind of it. They don't have the same gravitas, they don't have the same prominence as they used to, and they kind of just started to vanish. In more modern editions of 40k, like 7th and 8th edition, you see some artistic depictions of them, but there's no real kits, there's no real way to make yourself a proper Snakebite army. Nowadays, in modern Warhammer 40,000, Snakebites only really exist as one miniature, Zogrod Wartsnaga, the Gretchen guy. And to be fair, he's really good. He's almost an auto-include in every orc list. But that's just one little include for what used to be an entire subculture of the orcs. It's kind of a shame that something that used to be the other half of orcs is now barely a footnote, squeezed right in between like Goths and Death Skulls and Evil Sons. They barely exist nowadays, but I want to see if it's possible. I want to see if it's possible to build a 2026 orc Snakebite. To really make a Snakebite, the best route would probably be finding some sort of a proxy mini, something like a Savage Orc. But I want to see what can be done with the real thing. Looking at the old new Orc Boy sprue, some of these orcs are pretty plain. One of these guys even has his shirt off. I took this guy with a stick bomb and cleaned him up, getting him nice and ready for some conversion work. This is a push fit mini, and I find clipping the peg on an angle helps them to slide in properly. In no time, I had him standing, and I drilled out the gun barrel with a 1.4mm drill bit. I lost control, sending him spinning a couple of times, but with a little bit more effort, I got the operation done. I feel like a good old slug is not too techy for a Snakebite orc to reasonably have, but a stick bomb is a little bit too much. I clipped this off, leaving me with a little bit of a handle, and then I went looking for a choppa. I found one on the old 1999 Orc Boy sprue, and I clipped this off, leaving the handle long so I can join these two together. I used the point of my hobby knife to make a dent in the middle of each side, and then I drilled a 1mm hole through both ends so I can pin this. I inserted some 1mm brass rods so this would be a very strong connection, and the super glue is really just filling in the gap. I threw a little grinding wheel into my rotary tool and I started grinding down the axe shaft, not being too careful at all. I would prefer to work in some rough uneven texture into the Snakebite's primitive blade. So far so good, but he's still a completely normal modern orc boy. Now on his back, I would put a shoota. Modern orcs get sluggas, choppas, and shootas baked in, but Snakebites probably aren't machine gun guys. So what would a more primitive version of a powerful ranged weapon be? Spears. I took some 2mm plastic tubing I had laying around and I dragged my rotary tool all over to give it an uneven, rough texture. Then I clipped off 2 lengths for spear shafts. These will go on his back. I used a small cutting bit to make the groove at the end of each stick. Then to make my spear tips, I took some 0.7mm plastic card and I drew on some triangles the size and shape I want my finished spear tips to be. To cut these out, I don't want perfect triangles. I want these to be rough, so I took a 1mm drill bit and I drilled holes following my pencil mark so that the edges are extremely rough. With my spear tip Swiss cheesed, I cut off the surrounding plastic and then used a small grinding point to smooth out the bumpy edges and give my weapon a tapered edge. Then I clipped these out and I tucked them to the ends of the spear with a little drop of super glue. These feel like Snakebite weapons. He's ready to lob these suckers right before moving in for the kill. I want these tucked into the strap on his back. I made little dents where they will sit and then super glued them into position. Then to trap these guys in place, I mixed up some Greenaput, which is equal parts green stuff and Milliput. I rolled this putty ball flat and then used my hobby knife to cut off a strip the same width as the strap connecting his shoulder pad. And I carefully put this right over top using my sculpting brush to press it down into position. Now that's a little bit more Snakebite-y. To make him even more primal, I found this top knot with a skull on it from the old Orc Boys kit, and I carefully cut it off, slicing off the orc scalp so I don't lose any of the bit. Then I ground this down a little bit so it'll perfectly fit on the top of my new orc's head. A little plastic glue later and my orc now has a hairdo. This is pretty good, he's looking very different from the original. I am very pleasantly surprised. This guy is a Snakebite. I was definitely thinking it was going to be a challenge to turn a modern orc into a Snakebite. I think the move is probably to use the old Fantasy Savage orcs and kind of not touch the actual 40k orc catalog at all. But with enough kit bashing and converting, you definitely can get something that feels like a proper Snakebite. It would definitely be a slog to do up every single orc boy like this, but not impossible. It's kind of like Eldar Exodites. There aren't really any kits to do Eldar Exodites, so you'd have to really convert them. But if you did, it'd be awesome. And a proper Snakebite army would be pretty darn cool. To give my little cave orc a base, I started out gluing down some 1/4 inch cork to a Cobalt Keep 32mm base. I covered about 2/3 of the base and then added a second tier with a smaller chunk of cork. I used my Dremel with a sanding drum to round out the surface, and once I had it flat enough for his feet to stand, I glued him down, making a slot for the peg to fit into. Orcs have big old feet, so I'm not too worried about the connection snapping. Now he's attached, I coated the whole base in Vallejo European mud. This stuff has sand and a little bit of wood fibers in it, which makes it really nice and convincing earth. Now that he's ready to rock and roll, I hit him with a white prime. It's time to start picking out his bits. I took Darkwood speed paint, about 3 drops of Darkwood to 1 drop speed paint medium, and I put this all over his pants, bracelets, and his leather straps. Next I took hardened leather, which is a more yellowy brown, and I put this on his boots and loincloth. After that, I want to hit his weapon strap, and to make these a little bit different, I started out base coating the surface in desert yellow and then washing them with Darkwood. Speed paints are transparent so you can see the colors underneath. I used noble skin for his weapons, the head of his axe, his spear tip, and his slugga. I also threw a little bit of this onto the lower parts of his clothing to add a dark shadow, and I pushed this darkness further with some more glazes of Darkwood speed paint. To make his clothing look more realistic, I took some Dryad Brown, which is about the same color, and I sponged this all over his pants. Then I mixed some desert yellow into this, and I did another round of sponging to make the leather look really battered and worn. Next up, highlights of bony spikes. I put this on his loincloth to brighten it up, then edge highlights on all the leather bands and belts, and of course many highlights on the face of his skull to make it look dry and spooky. I mixed my bony spike and desert yellow together, and I dry brushed this onto the handles of his weapons, then some dry brushing of silver onto the business end of his weapons. Lastly, but not leastly, grim black on his hair. Orcs don't grow hair, so this is actually hair from a squig that he has nailed into his head. My little Snakebite is coming along nicely, and I was thinking about Snakebites in the world of modern Warhammer 40,000. They don't crop up a lot, but there is something kind of new in modern orcs, and that is the Beast Snagga Boy. Beast Snagga Boys look a lot like they would be Snakebites. They're more primitive, they wear a lot of skins, they're obsessed with hunting, and they seem like they would be Snakebites, but they're not necessarily Snakebites. Orc culture is a little weird. Orc culture is broken down into clans and cults, where clans are like the overarching philosophy, and cults are more specific to a group of orcs. Evil Sons see speed as the ultimate answer to war, but speed freaks are those orcs who are single-mindedly obsessed with going faster. Bad Moons love to hoard wealth and display their wealth, but freebooters are orcs who have abandoned their culture in favor of heading off into the galaxy as marauders, bandits, and thieves in order to get even richer. This is where the Beast Snaggas live. Snakebites are nomadic hunters, but Beast Snagga Boys are those orcs specifically obsessed with hunting giant monsters. A lot of Snakebites are probably Beast Snaggas, but not all Beast Snaggas are Snakebites, if that makes sense. I think if you were putting together a Snakebites army, Beast Snaggas would be a really good way to do that, because the Beast Snagga units are a lot more primitive and squig focused, and it would be a good way of not having so many of the not quite Snakebitey things. Like, I feel like it would be weird to have a Snakebites army with a Gorkanaut in it. I think Beast Snaggas would be the way to go. And speaking of this little Snakebite, he needs the snakiest part of him, the skin. I'm going with my tried and true Familiar Pink and Ghillie-Doo. This 1-2 punch makes for very nice and vibrant orc skin. First, I thin Familiar Pink with speed paint medium about 50-50 and then glaze this over the orc skin, especially around his mouth and hands, and the lower parts of his muscles. Where this color pools, when the green goes over it, it'll turn the green into a vibrant saturated brown. I also thin the Ghillie-Doo a little, probably about 3 drops of Ghillie-Doo to 1 drop of thinner, and I put this on everywhere except his teeth. With speed paint, it's important to get it right. Too much speed paint is impossible to take off, so I like to go with multiple thin coats to build up coverage instead of one thick coat. But you know what looks great in a thick coat? That's right, EonsOfBattle.com. We're all restocked on our excellent hobby goodies: Gamer Grass Tufts, Great Head Studio Bits for your Space Marines, Army Painter paints, brushes, basing cork, ultra thin and ultra thick super glue, and we've got terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month, members get a credit good for any one terrain pack we've ever made, or the brand new one. This July, we have created the Bocage Battlefield Terrain, a series of pieces perfect for putting together a historic landscape for games of Conflict 47, Bolt Action, or any war zone with a labyrinth of overgrown hedgerows. These pieces will funnel your infantry into tight firefights while holding a mysterious shack. Maybe it's just a utility building, or maybe it's an improvised encampment, hiding some flesh-eating zombies kept on ice for the right moment to unleash a devastating outbreak. This set was designed by us and is available at EonsOfBattle.com. With his skin done, it's time to give him some accents and tattoos. On his shoulder pad, I painted on 2 thin lines running up parallel with the armor, and then I carefully connected the lines with some triangles. I'm sure this means something in Snakebite language. Then I painted a red stripe over one eye and a band around his left arm, starting with a solid stripe and then having some triangles running down pointing towards his slugga. And speaking of that slugga, I painted on some fangs. 2 triangles connected by a line. This is one of the symbols of the Snakebites. It's a reference to the poisonous serpents that they love so much. This orc in particular has a little tooth stabbed into his shoulder, and I picked this out with the same colors I used on the skull, and that's a Snakebite orc all done. He's got a very old feel, and I want to keep that going on the base. I took some more Dryad Brown and I base coated the ground in this. Then for some contrast, I dug out my old bottle of Agrax the Earthshade. I haven't touched this in years, and there's still a few drops left in the bottom. I shaded the base, and then when this was dry, I gave it a dry brushing of Barren Dune. That's some nice dirt. Now for the sauce, some old Citadel grass. This is an antique. This used to be on the base of every model Games Workshop ever made. I brushed a little bit of white glue and then used tweezers to pick up some clumps of the static grass and shove it down into the glue. I feel like this really gives my boy a retro feel, and once I was happy with the grass, I hit the rim of the base with some black. My little Snakebite is all done. And the reason that they're called Snakebites is to prove how tough they are. They take venomous snakes and they let them bite them, and if they don't die, it proves that they're tough. And hilariously, when Snakebites are traveling, they actually like to bring their own venomous snakes, just in case the local snakes aren't up to snuff. Also, I said that Zogrod Wartsnaga is the only Snakebite model that's still in the range. That is actually not true. I thought of one more. I think they still sell it. The Gargantuan Squiggoth is the magnum opus of the Snakebites cultivating humongous squigs. So there's technically 2, assuming that the Gargantuan Squiggoth is still sold. It's temporarily out of stock, but it's still sold, so that is 2 Snakebite miniatures. I do think the Snakebites are in a little bit of a weird place. The bee Snaggas are a good option, but if you want true Snakebite, you're gonna have to probably convert all your miniatures like this. It's a little bit like with the Imperial Guard. There's no amount of clever color selection that'll turn Cadians into Vostroyan Firstborn. You kinda just gotta figure it out. The Snakebites are a really fun piece of Warhammer history. I am surprised how good a new orc looks done up in Snakebite styling. It would be a little tricky to make your whole army look like this. Maybe like 4 to 5 of each squad gets the hero treatment of being turned into a Snakebite, and everybody else is just extra brown. I think if you mushed them all together, you'd be able to get away with a pretty good looking Snakebite's army. This little Snakebite was a fun piece of orc history, and now with this guy done, I think I've knocked out all of the orc clans, so it might be time to start working on the orc cultures. There's a bunch of really fun ones, and also I could work on the orc warbands, like just the individual warbands. Like Tuska the Demon Hunter, that would be a fun one to work on, especially after 10,000 years. I don't think it's been quite that long, but he's been in the warp for a while, and being on a demon planet resurrected day after day probably leads to some weird looking orcs. That does sound like a fun one. I might have to work on that one soon. But this guy is done, and let me know in the comments below, what orcs do you want to see next? Thanks for watching.